Latina. I'm a Boricua. I'm Puerto Rican. Very proud of that fact, and just really excited to be here with these wonderful people. So we're just going to start out, and if y'all could sort of just share a little bit about yourself, specifically what brought you to psychedelics and advocacy, and what you identify as sort of your role, your place in this whole psychedelic movement. We can start with Danielle.
Oh my goodness, to go after you, Bill. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the intro, Bill. My name is Danielle Marie Herrera. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist working with psychedelic medicines. So those are my professional roles. I work with harm reduction psychotherapy at Harm Reduction Therapy Center, and I also work with SAGE Institute for Psychedelic Therapy, primarily working with ketamine at this point in time, and then hoping to work with MDMA as it becomes accessible. I'm really passionate about those roles, but I mostly just say that I love people for a living, and I feel really grateful to continue my lineage of medicine work in this day in psychedelic medicines. Really passionate about decolonizing psychedelic psychotherapy, so we'll be talking a little bit about that. I am also primarily, over all of these roles, I am a lover, I am an auntie, I am a sister, I am a daughter, I am a reader, I am an artist in whatever way I can be, and I'm looking forward to communicating with y'all today. So thank you for having me. And who I'll tag someone?
Yeah.
Ori.
Thank you, Danielle. My name is Oriana Mayorga, she, her, ella pronouns. I am currently on Descueta, unceded territory, which is also known as Seminole land, but I am a native New Yorker and I miss it a little bit. What brought me into psychedelics? Interest, anxiety, joy. All my friends were doing Molly and I was too anxious to do it, and found an amazing book by a Latino author, which just propelled me into finding MAPS. And MAPS and SSDP helped cultivate the interest and the passion that I have for this field. And I would say my role in this movement, I think it's a little complex. I'm a friend, I'm a disruptor. I am trying to be more of a mediator, a facilitator, a space holder, and just someone who just tries to speak truth to power and wants to make this movement, wants to work in coalition to make this movement a lot more anti-oppressive and anti-violent and equitable. I'll pass it to Kaylee.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be with the inspirational humans. This is just a real treat. And apologies if my internet connection is not the best. I am currently on the move and spent the night under the stars in the Nevada mountains, which was everything I needed and more. So this is my in homage to faith. And just getting close to nature. My name is Kaylee. My pronouns are they, she. Sometimes, just ask, depends on the present. You guys can hear me. I'll repeat some of the basic things. But actually, my primary role, or the primary role that
Looks like we're having a little trouble hearing Kayla. Oh, there we go. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Maybe Kaylee, you could put the rest of your intro in the chat. Would that be helpful?
This is real. This is things that we need to work on to get people in the planet. It's unfortunately feel like it's unstable right now. Can y'all do better like this? How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go quick. I'm just gonna get a quick overview so we can meet these challenges. My primary role in all the spaces that I'm in is as a community builder and social advocate first and foremost. I feel like from that place I can come from my spirit instead of from things that have been attained or achieved in this physical realm. And so I feel like I can do a lot more to build community and support folks in achieving their own goals, as well as just developing my own self, my personhood, and what that means for me as an Afro-Indigenous individual, as somebody with complicated mixed racial backgrounds and colonized history, as somebody who can't go back more than 2 lineages because we just don't have documents, y'all. So there's just so much there that I am with for myself and how I deal with cultural misorientation and decolonizing myself daily and learning who I am at my core, aside from or underneath the oppression that has been layered upon layer upon layer, on top of who I am. So really what brought me to this work was my own self-work, and also to help facilitate other people in getting the medicine that they need, whatever that medicine may be. That may not be a psychedelic. Sometimes it's not music. It may be a vibe. It may be a space. It may be just being. And so I'm just happy to cultivate that kind of reciprocity, that kind of equity, that kind of community for collective liberation of people of color, vegetation. So that's what I'm here to do. Just each other up and empower each other to go into our, to just blossom into our full selves and know comfortable with who we are at our authentic core. And I'll point it to go.
Thank you, Kaylee. Hey, everyone. My name is Paula Graciela. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm tuning in from Tataviam territory in Los Angeles County, California. And I came into psychedelic drug policy work actually as, someone who came into substance use, self-medicating at age 14. So I was experimenting with altered consciousness at a very young age, and, experimenting in the nightlife scene and processing my lived experiences as a young queer femme of color, and also processing gender-based sexual violence. That was like a huge path of initiation into self-medicating, and also, issues around confidence and intergenerational trauma, but without much guidance. So no mentor, no femtor to really guide that substance use as a teenager. And just encountering a lot of oppressive encounters in the nightlife world really activated me to become an advocate in this space. Something I really like to share is that when I was in middle school, my mom had shared with me that one day we were going to sit in psilocybin mushroom ceremony together. She had told me that we would go to Oaxaca one day and sit in ceremony together. And I remember being a teenager around age 16, and I was like, okay, Mom, let's go. I'm ready for it. Like, let's do that ceremony. And she's like, I don't remember you saying, like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then in 2015, I lost my mom to cancer. And it's been devastating, but I always think about like what could have been had we sat in ceremony together with the medicine. And so I'm really passionate in ensuring that folks have access to medicine that can repair intergenerational trauma and the types of chronic illnesses that can arise from untreated intergenerational trauma. And I would also say that my search for freedom and empowerment has brought me into this work, into substance use, and lastly, I'm a community investment and decarceration strategist at Freedom for Immigrants, where we work on ending the mass incarceration of immigrants. I'll be sharing more later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all. So as y'all can see, we have like an incredible panel of people. It was just so wonderful. I'll just add to that, in addition to all the SSDP work that I do, it's really important to me to ensure that the psychedelic space is one that is welcoming to all of us, which is, a big part of my reasoning, for developing the career development pipeline, is so that, those of us who haven't had mentors, like Paula mentioned, can, take a chance and help mentor others, so sort of giving back a little bit to folks like us, and also ensuring accessibility of this type of healing and these medicines, like Kaylee mentioned, whether it's a plant or music or whatever. So that's a big part of my sort of inspiration for founding Sonic Healing Collective here in Chicago, which is a nonprofit that we're getting ready to launch into the world a little bit more in a couple months here. So, Paula kind of dove right in with getting personal, and we're gonna continue with that line. And just because I think one of the things that we've all recognized is that we're all sort of healing from a lot, and part of that is showing up in the work that we're doing in this space. And so I'm curious if y'all something you've been sort of bringing that's
lost me for a second.
Oh no, my internet connection is unstable. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, but yeah, so something that you're bringing to work with daily that's maybe related to your lineage as a Latina, and how do psychedelics play a role? How have they played a role? We'll start with Ori.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I think this is a perfect time to be like whiteness and urgency and how it shows up in my body. And I mean, there's so much I think that we've talked about together, and I think a lot of what everyone's going to mention, I would be like, me too, because as a person who comes from, as Kaylee was saying, a very colonized lineage, all the things, right? Gender-based violence, sexual violence, all types of the oppression. But I would say definitely whiteness. Like, damn, there's so much of that in my body. I went to school and primarily, like my upper school was primarily a very white institution, and my middle school too. And so just like working to undo that is hard. And so psychedelics play a role here because I'm trying to do my medicine work with less white folks, which is hard because my partner's white. But like, what does it mean to sit and be with my folks and learn how to play with my folks and keep myself accountable around the deep anti-Blackness that's in my body too, right? And sort of having to contend with both of that. So I would say that's the thing that shows up for me. I'll pass it to Danielle.
Thank you for that, Ori. I can completely snaps 100% working with whiteness all day, every day, especially in this field. I'll name, right off the bat is the ever presence of intergenerational trauma and working with my family who's currently healing from, a lot of the negative effects of the war on drugs, rather than the healing elements, while trying to advocate for access for medicines for healing. And that's been really tricky. I grew up with my mother and my father being drug users. And that's what, I remember my Pat Denning, who I work for at Harm Reduction Therapy, saying oh, you're a harm reductionist because you were a harm reductionist before there was even a word for it. Because I loved people who used drugs. My mom loved meth and my father loved heroin. And they were an interesting combination. And there's a lot of that there. But it had me really questioning, what is going on here with our stigmatization, our criminalization. And I still have this body and I'm still working through my own internalized stuff surrounding what their relationships with their drugs meant for me. And I'm serving populations that absolutely resemble them, as well as populations who do not experience the the harms of the war on drugs, they only really benefit, right? They only get the like profound capacity for healing. So that's been something that's been difficult for me to play with and to be accountable to constantly, returning home while doing this. And I'm always looking for community that's going to be able to support me in this, which is difficult to find in the psychedelic world when I don't have a lot of friends, especially friends in white bodies that have similar histories, you know, or who can hold that with me. So it's been really nice to connect to this group, even in particular, just to be able to finally see somebody on a panel who looks like me, and it's really, it means everything. So I'll tag Paula.
Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, I wanna bring up workaholism because it shows up in my body and life a lot. My grandmother migrated to the US in the 70s, and she became a domestic worker. She migrated from Guatemala. And my grandma worked so hard, like too much. And so did my mom, and so did my dad. So I feel like that's definitely showing up in my life too. And just, yeah, it's tied to self-worth and self-esteem. And just, I also want to talk about how in my household, at least with my Guatemalan side of the family, at least with my grandmother, European features were really favored by her. So I was taught growing up that indigenous features were not beautiful. And that impacted my body image, my self-worth. Also, like, you know, just, I was a chubby kid, so yeah, just like getting certain subliminal messaging from my mother was really hard. And going to middle school and high school in Los Angeles in the early 2000s, like there was a high presence of drugs in my middle school even. So just working through all of these things has been interesting. And just having this gained perspective. I'm now 27, so like observing where I was at when I was 17 and using psychedelics to try to like navigate all of these insecurities I was facing. Something I want to say is that my relationship with psilocybin mushrooms keeps me really accountable to confronting some parts of myself that are difficult to be honest about. So I really, I'm so grateful for psilocybin medicine as that type of teacher. And also want to name that ketamine and MDMA help me move through certain memories. I'm really fascinated by how with ketamine, you can move through different times. It's kind of like time traveling and integrating some like random ass memory that you haven't thought about in a while and doing it in a way that feels safe, at least for me. And then just naming that LSD has really helped me connect with my like playful, joyful, spontaneous energy. So it's been really helping with rest. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Kaylee.
Kaylee, still with us?
I'm here, in and out, but I'm always coming back. I'm here, y'all. This has been just so beautiful to hear a little bit more of your stories. It's really special. I agree with the sentiment of just being in community with being in community where I don't feel like I have to grit my teeth. Being in community where I can show up as myself. Being in community where I can feel safe to explore self. To be held, to breathe. Befriend and grief. That's what I've been working on as my own intention, and is very heavily tied into self-compassion. And yeah, my journey has been not blissful. It's been really painful. It's been really disheartening. Come out of an integration and be chronically, perpetually stressed and traumatized. For people to tell me that mindfulness is not harmful, and then all I can see is oppression. It's overwhelming, y'all, and it takes a lot of my energy to digest what I'm seeing on a daily, what I'm experiencing myself, without losing hope. And that is the part of the grief that I navigate when it swells, and I tend to, and I pacify on ways that I am learning and continue to evolve as I move through it, because I'm at the first.
Yeah, you froze a little bit there, Kaylee.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Y'all, thanks for your patience. Whenever I have technical issues, which is often, I like to say that it's quite powerful. And our
Thank you, Kaylee, and all of you. I'm in here just like wanting to give y'all a big ass hug and just to be in a space with you physically. So this is the best we can do now, but I'm just holding all of this very closely, and I find myself just agreeing, resonating with your stories, and recognizing a lot of that in myself. For me, one of the things that I've kind of been working on is trying to like reroute a little bit back into my own community. And so I've been for the past year or so, I've been taking some like advanced Spanish classes through a lovely group called Spanish Sin Pena. I've been able to speak Spanish, my whole life, but there's always been a lot of shame about not like speaking Spanish perfectly, or sounding like a gringa and all of this. So that's been a huge effort and really important part of it, and being able to sort of come back to this space and this community feeling a little bit more connected, and being able to connect with you, and that is super valuable. So thank you. So kind of getting back then to how we carried all of this into psychedelic spaces, I'm curious, what are some of the things that you've seen, the communal concerns you've maybe observed or experienced in the past few years of the psychedelic sort of movement of sorts? Ori.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm looking at time. I'm gonna actually add the lateral violence part to this, and just in case, because I don't want us to miss that part. For me, I think the biggest communal concern that I am the most attuned to right now, and that's most alive for me, is this idea of lateral violence, right? So the idea that we, as colonized people and as oppressed folks, marginalized folks, we already have the white violence that we deal with, but then lateral violence is when we're just being violent to each other. And so I'm going to bring this in and talk a little bit about how this applies to Maria Sabina, and then pass it off to Paula. But I'll just say, for me, when I think about lateral violence, I think of two really concrete examples. There's overt lateral violence and covert. And so for me, the two examples that resonate the most, an example of overt lateral violence in the psychedelic space, right, amongst each other, would be something like, I don't know, knowing that one of us is a gifted or qualified speaker for an event or for a panel, but we purposely block them, right? We say, no, don't reach out to her. Or we say, actually, I know someone better, but we don't really, right? That's an ugly sort of more overt, and I hope less frequent thing that happens, right? But that's an example of overt. Something that I think is a lot more pronounced and common is covert forms of lateral violence, which I think sometimes we're aware of it and sometimes we're not, right? Because it's in our bodies. We know how to be violent. And so a covert form of violence is not having time for each other, right? Maybe somebody's reaching out for mentorship. Maybe somebody wants to connect with you about something that they whatever, want to learn about something, want to do reconciliation work, whatever the case may be, and you just never have time for them. Now that's challenging, right? Because we are busy people, and so much is pulled on us as women of color, as people of color, and that's an example of not such visible lateral violence, is saying, I don't have time for you, or maybe 2 years from now, or maybe a year from now, just not prioritizing, right, the relationship. And how this ties into Maria Sabina, and then I'll pass it on, is, Maria Sabina was born in 1894, and she was a beloved curandera, healer, in her indigenous community known as the Mazatec people, who are alive and well and rich and vibrant in Mexico right now, in the state of Oaxaca. And a mutual friend of Paula and I, Inti Garcia, gave me some background on Maria Sabina that I really didn't know about. And essentially, like most women of color who do incredible work, she was exploited and died in poverty, even though she was one of the leading women of bringing psilocybin medicine into the West, right? And so in our own communities, we see her name, we see just who she is being co-opted, right, across many different communities. And so not wanting to replicate that is, I think, a form of interrupting and disrupting lateral violence, right? How do we call each other in when we see each other doing that? And I'll pass it on to Paula to add a little more.
Thank you, Oriana. Yeah, I think this really ties well with my concern, and my concern is the cognitive dissonance that I've been observing in the psychedelic movement, which is, psychedelic exceptionalism, that we're working for decriminalization of psychedelic substances, but we're not talking about other psychoactive substances that are more highly criminalized and penalized, and it's disproportionately affecting racialized populations, putting them into pipelines into mass incarceration, deportation, and family separation. So for me, it's like this huge contradiction that people are advocating for the decriminalization of these sacred substances that historically have been stewarded by the ancestors of the populations that are currently being targeted by these militarized transnational regimes. And there's often an overlap between folks that are psychedelic substance users and other psychoactive substance users. So I know, because I know people that do cocaine and also do psychedelics, and I'm so outraged by it, because there's a huge system of forced migration that's being driven by the prohibition of these substances, and it's highly linked to our taxpayer dollars being utilized to drive military aid and the global arms industry. And so I really want to see a more intersectional approach to ending the war on drugs, because I think it's just really contradictory to be fighting for the exclusive use of psychedelics for very privileged populations, when in 2019, 67,000 people were arrested. Immigrants were arrested for drug-related charges, and the top reason for deportations in 2019 were drug-related charges as well. So I don't think it's just for us to be working for decriminalization of psychedelic substances without ending the detention to deportation pipeline of immigrants for drug-related charges. So yeah, I just really want to see more intersectional action amongst people in the psychedelic movement. I'll turn it over to Kaylee.
Y'all, I've switched devices. I'm in the sun now too, outside. So let's see what we can do. I resonate with all that you're saying. I think, and even for my own personal and professional work, I've been doing more advocacy for drug policy. I'm doing more for ending the war on drugs, having family and friends that have, just been devoured by the system, right? And continue to be, and that's in all these major systems, right? I'm in healthcare, it's atrocious. What I see pains me, it really does. And just to speak to this, my mom was in a tragic accident yesterday on a plane and took a blow to the head and wound up in a hospital in a city she is not from. She was in Philly, where I was born and raised in New York, and now she's living in Orlando. And she was alone, y'all, alone in a city she's not aware of, in a hospital she's never been in. And I spoke to folks that witnessed her injury, and she was disoriented. I spoke to my mom, and I spoke to a person I couldn't recognize. I was so afraid. And she was in that healthcare system, and I had to call, and this has been my whole COVID experience with my family, that I cry and I mourn for fucking days, excuse my language, because it's so painful to hear and know that my family members aren't getting the care that they deserve. And I know it because I'm in this system. I know it because I can't help them. And so I mourn and I scream and I cry just to move that energy and grieve, because I feel helpless. And I'm trying everything I can to put Band-Aids everywhere in a fractured system that needs to be redone to support all people, all humans, all of us. And it's just not doing that. So my personal mission is to do that wherever I can, personally, professionally, wherever I can. I'll lend a hand, give support, provide community, basic needs, whatever we can do. If I need to stand beside you with a sign, I will do that. I will go to the rally. You know what I mean? Like, that's how, for me, that's how I show up for community, is through reciprocity, by your side. I am on your team. I'm in it for this intersectional solidarity, because there's no way we can blossom without each other, and do this work and be recognized and seen. We won't be seen otherwise, unless we stand collectively. And so my mission is to build community wherever I can, however I can, and to invite people to act in a way that is resonant with their passions, with what their social justice goals are aligned with, and to remember who they are in their spirit realm, not just this physical earth. Thank you, y'all.
Thank you all. Yeah. Whew. Just such freaking powerful stuff. So I know we're running short on time, and I want to be able to get to questions too. So we were talking a little bit about sort of decolonizing ourselves. And I want to hear from y'all a little bit about what opportunities you see to decolonize the spaces we're in, whether it's, therapy, Danielle, or academic spaces or other spaces we interact with. What opportunities do you see? And or you kind of started talking about lateral violence a little bit. And I think there was a couple of things that you wanted to expand on there. So I'll let you start.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would say that, the mentorship program, right, at SSDP is a beautiful example of one of the ways to circumvent all the lateral ethnic violence, right? We're going to create our own pipelines to support each other in the ways that we can. Making time for one another. Like, we are all busy, we have a lot, but I think being intentional for me of no, I'm going to prioritize the few women of color that I know in my community, because there's not a lot of us, and there's certainly not a lot of Latinas, right? So that's sort of a praxis, a commitment that I have to myself, that even if we don't like each other, even if we're not friends, we can be in coalition together, we can work together, we can figure out ways, we can create guidelines, right, to be in relationship with each other enough to get the work done. And so a way that I would like us to consider circumventing lateral violence is recommitting to each other on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, what it's like to be in community, to be mentors to each other. Because I think that one thing that Paula mentioned that I also experience and still experience is when I'm suffering, I don't have anyone to go to other than Vilmarie. I don't have any literal other Latinas in this movement to go to. How is that possible? That are slightly older than me to hold me, right? To help me figure out where I'm wrong to, where I need to be held accountable. And so that's one thing that I'll say, is that I think we can figure out ways of incorporating this in the movement, whether it's in academic spaces or in therapeutic spaces. And I'll pass it to Danielle, because I know you have a lot to say on that.
My heart is exploding, y'all. Yes to this. Right now, really holding the reality of that grief is a doorway to love, and that if we want to be responsible to ourselves for decolonizing this space, this head space, that we all need to be accountable first. Every single one of us, not just those who are obviously affected by colonialism, but everybody in the whole everything, because we're all harmed by it. But how to decolonize this space is to hold that grief with each other, right? Like being able to work with it, be vulnerable with it. Know that that the space is ours. I get a lot of sense of scarcity mindset when it comes to identities that look like our identities, that there's only one seat at the table for somebody who looks like us. And then the lateral violence that then occurs when we start to have that panic come up, and maybe it's an old wound of there's only one person who can get to this place. There's not enough to go around, right? And there's so much I could say about decolonizing these spaces, especially therapy, which the first thing I'll say, and I encourage y'all to just reach out and have this conversation with me, and maybe, let's get a group together and just talk about it, but keeping the dialogue open as much as we can. But first thing to acknowledge is that therapy cannot be decolonized. Never using the language decolonized, right, is a huge part of it. Knowing that there is blood on our hands and all of this involved. So what are we going to do about the grief that comes with that, right? And I'll pin back to Paula's note on psychedelic exceptionalism here too. Like, how are we going to love the folks that are involved with us who aren't just using these incredible drugs for healing, but are also using drugs for healing that maybe don't look like ones that we usually call for healing? Like, what if people are having spiritual emergence using methamphetamine, and what kind of space can we offer for that? And when we're talking about therapy, how can we make therapy not so white, right? So that folks who look like us can feel like therapy is for them. What I experience most as a therapist serving the BIPOC community is my client expressing to me that they don't feel like the resource is for them. And that is for thousands of reasons, from the cost to the art on the wall that has no representation of anything to their cultural background, to whatever, all of the things that we've written down in therapy being like the way it's supposed to be, such as you don't eat in therapy. In every table I've ever sat at, I've had food with that person. What about the fact that we're not supposed to have multiple relationships with clients, right? Like, okay, if there's such a small amount of BIPOC folks, how am I not supposed to have what am I supposed to do? Run away, right? So there's just a lot of things where we have to constantly questioning, how are we engaging with this healing modality? How are we providing access for it? How are we making sure that folks not only feel invited, but know that it's been theirs the whole time? And I'm sure y'all could just speak to this more. So whoever wants to pop on, I would love to hear your voice.
Kaylee's got something.
I got something. I'm gonna drop something. This is so great. Like, these are all the things that I'm like constantly asking myself, right? And my friends and my family, I'm sure they're sick of me. They're sitting actually waiting for me at the diner. So what I'll say about this is a few things. One, about the lateral violence, it's sad. That's that we need to deal in-house within the family, because there's so many things within culture that we do that is just, it's saddening, it's disheartening. It needs to be addressed with tender loving care in a safe space. And that's not going to be happening for me in therapy. I'm sorry, it's just not. I've done it. I did the Eurocentric system. It did nothing for me but cause more suffering. So for my own healing, have always sought out indigenous ways. And when I'm storming y'all, it's like straight to, like this family spiritual, counselor, essentially, in the Western world, or my spiritual practitioner. And I go find community, because I'd lose myself, y'all, if I didn't have something. And this year has been trying in terms of my own mental health and my own personal praxis and what that looks like. And I've been just contending with that. So it's been hard. And I'm hearing, or you bring up like mentorship. And I think it's so needed. And for me, I know that I do more, and I try to do as much as I can with the capacity that I have. Meaning, if I'm drowning, there's only so much I can share from a place that is, that where I'm just trying to do damage control. essentially. And that's often, right, with how much grieving we've been doing, with how much death we've been seeing. And I'm just to here with loss and grief and transforming that, focusing on what does that look like? What does my liberation look like, right, for me? And what does that look like for you? And how can I best support your liberation? And part of that is a call to action, is how can we invite people in, right? How can we do this in a sense that we're not always going to be aligned? We're not always going to have the same goals and missions, values, but how can we move still in unison? How can we celebrate differences and reconcile them with accountability and conversation and dialogue, just like we would in the ceremony, you know, bring it back home, bring it to the family table, sit down, commune together, mourn together, grieve together. What does that look like? And a few folks that I've been in contact with, like this is what we've been talking about, you know, like what does this look like? I kind of sat back and waited for it to show up. I thought somebody would do it. And so that's my bad, you know. But it also speaks to Paula, like the workaholic, right? And I'm not wanting to do everything. I'm wanting to have clear boundaries for myself and say, like, enough is enough. Like, you have enough to do. You're doing enough and you are worthy regardless, you know? But yeah, we need a place and we need to build ourselves from the ground up, in culturally grounded, right? What does that look like? I want something that doesn't start off right. I want it that starts off from my culture. That's what makes most sense to me. And it's hard to find that. So we have to build it ourselves. That's what that means. We can't keep searching. We're wasting time. And there's people who need support. And so that's what motivates me. The workaholic thing is something I have to constantly check because it could easily turn into martyrism. It could easily turn into a lifetime of utter service, right? And I see that in every woman in my family has been just a martyr, devoted to service, devoted to giving. But what about themselves? They deserve to give to themselves. They deserve to have peace and rest. And I don't see it. And I say enough. I'm breaking that. That's my intergenerational trauma. That shit needs to stop right now. And I'm happy to support my friends and family who are interested in that too. Let's look at this. Let's talk about it. And so a few folks and I started a conversation that into hopefully an association, hopefully it's a safe space where we can co-create together, a decentralized hub where we can convene in horizontal, decentralized goodness and liberation and love. So we'll drop a link for that. Hopefully we'll share with you, but it's pocliberation.org. And you just put your email in there and we'll just invite you to the next conversation. Come, bring your friends who you think are interested in culturally grounded liberation and exploring what that looks like with other folks who look like you. I don't know what it's gonna look like. I have no plans. I'm not a leader. I'm not a head. I'm a facilitator. I like to invite people to spaces and see what we can make together. So let's build, y'all. Let's build the spaces we need so desperately. Let's do this. The trainings we need so desperately, everything we need to remember who we are.
Yes. Thank you, Kaylee. And that moves us perfectly into wrapping up this session and getting to Q&A. Just briefly, I'm wondering if y'all could share maybe a call-in to action or a prayer or some other something that you'd like to share with our audience today. Kaylee, I'm going to put the link to that org in the chat here in a sec. How about you, Ori?
Yeah, thank you, Vil. I would say I'm seeing a lot of, specifically people of color, do a lot of the same work. And while it's inspiring, it also gives me pause, right? What's happening? Why are we doing all the same kind of projects in different groups and silos, right? So while I want there to be a diversity of spaces, because I think that's critical, I would also like us to be in coalition together. And what does coalition look like? Well, I think one thing that our Black and Indigenous siblings have taught us and continue to teach us is the importance of affinity spaces, right? There are Black-led only collectives. There are Indigenous only spaces. I would like, as complicated as Latinaje and Latinidad is, I would like a Latine space. It doesn't need to be a nonprofit. It doesn't need to be a Zoom hangout. It can just be a listserv, right? And so I've been wanting for a long time to create a specific Latine way of being like in relationship with each other. And so the call to action is If you have any experience with creating listservs, if you want to be on a very low-key, once-a-month listserv where we just celebrate and share each other's work and support each other in ways, or when you're applying for that grant and you can't do it in the middle of the night and you want to cry, you can hit each other up. It doesn't need to be another Slack. It doesn't need to be another Facebook group, just a listserv. Please reach out. And I'll put my email in the chat. But again, something that is made of all of us and not a founder, not a co-founder, right? Like Kaylee was saying, a decentralized hub. I'll pass up to Paula.
Yeah, so my call to action is also for coalition building, regional coalition building for a shift in our city, county, and state budgets. And I'll share something that I've been working on here in California in a coalition space with both criminal, legal punishment, abolitionist groups and immigrant rights groups. We've been working on a budget to save lives. And what a budget to save lives advocates for is for a divestment from carceral facilities, policing, criminalization in general, and a reinvestment in community-based systems of care. And it's gonna take a lot of advocacy. This is a multi-year vision, and we've already gone 2 rounds of state budget processes and advocating for it. And that means that we're meeting with assembly members, we're meeting with senators and their staff members. And it's really challenging work because you're trying to convince people that are in this entrenched system that continues to use public money on mass incarceration, family separation, and they don't see it as a ethical dilemma, as a financially unsustainable. I really recommend folks to get into divestment efforts at the local city level, county level, because we really can't afford to have our public resources funneled into policing and incarceration. We need that money for safe consumption sites. We need that funding for substance counseling. We need that funding for culturally relevant forms of healing. And so my call to action is also for folks to become active in supporting folks that are exiting, that are being released from immigrant prisons, because there's both longtime community residents, but then there's also asylum seekers, arriving immigrants, and people arrive and they're totally disoriented because not only did they experience a lot of trauma in their country of origin, but also through the migration route, and also in these sites of torture, these immigrant prisons where human rights violations occur with impunity. And so people are released and they don't have anywhere to go. So sometimes they need shelter, they need like basic needs. So we need folks to regionally organize humanitarian support because the government's not providing it. And that's also part of the divestment and reinvestment advocacy. I'm more than happy to share my email if you're interested in organizing on the local level, but it's up to all of us, especially because many of these folks are forced to migrate because of the arms industry that is very closely related to the war on drugs and also to environmental injustice. And lastly, I think we all need to do better in supporting our youth. Just from personal experience, we need to improve our K through 12 education, sex education, and substance education.
Thank you, Paula. Danielle?
Y'all are amazing. My call to action is what balances all of this work out, which is sacred joy and rest. Please, God and goddesses, please rest. I am so tired of seeing bodies that looks anything like mine burn out. And I've been burning out, I've been past burnt out. And it's probably because I haven't had a single person who to kind of like keep me accountable to this place, you know, that experiences the amount of work that I do. And, you know, the people that I do have are incredible at this, but they also got pretty nice generational wealth families to go back to when they're in need of rest. And so it doesn't, we can't really connect, right? So I'm wanting to remind all y'all who are experiencing intergenerational trauma that if your intergenerational trauma is there is just as much, if not more, intergenerational wisdom and joy and pleasure and rest. And I just want to see y'all nap. I want to see y'all paint and paint your nails and read poetry. And so that's why I'm here, right? I want check-ins. I want check-ins with each other. I want like a coast, like a buddy system where y'all are like saying like, what did you do today that was literally just for you to chill out, you know, and give your brain a little bit of that like coolant, because this work is hard. This work is real hard, and I'm not trying to see anybody lose. themselves anymore, okay? Restorative justice. I'm gonna read y'all a poem. This is from a favorite, Borderlands, Gloria. And this is what I kind of says it, all right? Translated from Spanish, my Spanish is awful. Don't give in, chicanita. Don't give in, mi priatita. Tighten your belt, endure. Your lineage is ancient, your roots, like those of the mesquite, firmly planted, digging underground toward that current, the soul of Tierra Madre, your origin. Yes, mi hijita, your people were raised in Los Ranchos, here in the valley near the Rio Grande. You descended from the first cowboy, the vaquero, right smack in the border, in the age before the gringo, when Texas was Mexico, over in Los Ranchos, Los Vejeles, y Jesus Maria. Davila land, strong woman reared you, my sister, your mom, my mother, and I. And yes, they've taken our lands. Not even the cemetery is ours now, where they buried Don Urbano, your great-great-grandfather. Hard times like fodder we carry, with curved backs we walk. But they will never take that pride of being Mexicana, Chicana, Tejana, nor our Indian woman's spirit. And when the gringos are gone, see how they kill one another. Here, we'll still be like the horned toad and the lizard, relics of an earlier age, survivors of the first fire age, El Cuento Sol. Perhaps we'll be dying of hunger as usual, but we'll be members of a new species, skin tone between black and bronze, second eyelid under the first, with the power to look at the sun through naked eyes. And alive, mi hijita, very much alive. Yes, in a few years or centuries, La Raza will rise up, tongue intact, carrying the best of all cultures. That sleeping serpent, rebellion, revolution, will spring up. Like old skin will fall the slave ways of obedience, acceptance, silence. Like serpent lighting will move, little woman, you'll see. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, yeah. What a gift. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions, or we're gonna go just a couple minutes over so we can get to a couple of these. Let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, Kevin asks, what are your thoughts on intergenerational trauma and healing with family? We kind of talked about this a little bit. So how would you approach that or engage in it?
You know, I respect people who, as Keely said, the European model of therapy does not serve them. All good and well. And my encouragement would be, let's try it out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. There are so many other modalities. I really like somatics, right? It's a body-based way of working with someone to release trauma. I think, Kevin, when I hear your question, what lands for me and what's most alive is the idea of like, well, how do I do this with my family? And encouraging my little sisters, encouraging my parents to consider some form of therapy, even if that means going to the woods by yourself once a week, right? Whatever that looks like for you, but just some time between myself and another living entity is a thing that I would say could be a starting point.
I love that. I'll jump in. Thank you. I love this work. 100% on the therapy note, whatever that looks like for y'all. We'll totally name here that just doing your own work when it comes to trauma that you know lives inside of your body intergenerationally has an effect on the lineages before you as well as the futures after you. And it's incredibly powerful, just naming the intention. And if you can combine medicine work with psychotherapy, that's like good shit. Sorry. That's real good. And naming with therapists, like just straight up be real with them. Like, I'm really not cool with how white and colonized this structure is. We need it to be different. That person is working with you. That's their responsibility. And if they feel like they're not up to that challenge, then they can refer you out to somebody who can. Okay, so just naming that part. Additionally, again, the pleasure, the joy, like being able to communicate through family in a way that isn't just like, hey, like heal your traumas and all the way you've harmed me, but also like, here's some medicines. What do you need to experience some love? Where are you not feeling held? Your own inner child will turn into you holding the child versions of your mother and your father and your sister and your brother. Like, these are all going to happen. So just really holding yourself is powerful.
Thank you. Let's see, Logan. When energy for everyone, and especially Black, Indigenous, women of color is in super short supply, what is the best way for white folks to stay knowledgeable, informed, and working effectively to support you in the movement without being a tax on energy and women of color? So in other words, how to be a good ally?
I would love to answer that.
Yeah, please do.
I think for me, what that looks like is actionable steps. So I see a lot of folks like saying they want to be allies and then, but not like showing up. Like, what does that look like? Like, maybe we need to have a conversation about what allyship looks like. Because for me, that looks like actionable steps in a sense that how do you empower women of color? How do you empower people of color? You pass the mic to them and help them build on their own, because it needs to be built from the ground up, culturally grounded, and honoring and respecting what that looks like at someone's side, you know, not standing in front of them as like a contender or someone who's like advising them, because they know best what they need. Who is going to know better than somebody who's culturally grounded, what they need for themselves to fulfill that need of culture, that need of solidarity, that need of cultural relevancy, and remaining curious and asking and you know, for me, it's like having the privilege, you know, like really recognizing when you're showing up in dialogue, when you're feeling that tension in your body start to rise and start to reflect why that is, why that's coming up for you. So it's also about doing your own work as to why you're feeling the way that you're feeling in response to some of the things you see in the news, some of the conversations that you're having with people of color, some of the things you hear them saying. Like, what is that bringing up for you? And what are you doing to kind of move through that yourself? And then how are you showing up in an actionable way to empower people of color in academic spaces, in research, in therapy, in peer support, in harm reduction, in policy-driven work, and mission-driven work, all of it? Like, what does that look like?
Excellent. Thank you, Kaylee. We'll do one more before we wrap up, just quickly, because it's a good one. Allison asks, what are your thoughts on psychedelic exceptionalism within psychedelic communities? What advice do you have for people trying to bridge the gap between harm reduction for more marginalized communities of people who use drugs and this plant entheogenic medicine movement that's become increasingly popular?
Can you read it one more time? I just want to I need a full impact. It's so rich.
Yes, for sure. What are your thoughts on psychedelic exceptionalism within psychedelic communities? And what advice do you have for people trying to bridge the gap between harm reduction for more marginalized communities of people who use drugs and this plant entheogenic medicine movement that's become popular?
So
Noted.
I'm happy to take the first part. Maybe somebody else can take the second part, because that's many questions. Yeah, Paula, I was thinking that's all you, dear.
We can all just do 30 seconds and just drop in your message about it. Go for it.
I would say that, I think it's funny. There's like people of color in the psychedelic community that don't think that exceptionalism is a real thing. They think which I actually think it's quite interesting. They think that it's a made up concept used to divide us more. It blows my mind. Psychedelics, they're not exceptional, and I have to constantly tell even my comrades that they're not exceptional. They're powerful, they're beautiful, they're sexy, but so is cocaine, and so is meth, and so that's, I think, where SSDP and drug policy folks come in, right? But I'll just say that for now, and I'll pass it to Paula.
I think there needs to be more peer education and bridge building between different movements. I think that I've had conversations with psychedelic exceptionalists, and when I've when we've talked with other advocates, harm reduction practitioners and advocates, and advocated for them taking a more comprehensive approach to the decriminalization of all drugs, they've said that it's divisive, or that like psychedelics bring more unity and oneness, and it's a lot of spiritual bypassing actually. So I think it has to become a more non-negotiable conversation, because users of psychedelic substances are accountable to Indigenous people, they're accountable to African people. We're all accountable to those who have disproportionately been targeted by the war on drugs. And it's really this practice of reckoning and accountability that we can't just leave people, we can't throw people under the bus. But really also what's happening in California, I'm going to share the work of the Alternatives to Incarceration Working Group that created like over 100 recommendations, and right now we're in the implementation phase at LA County, and a lot of this has to do with decarceration and providing drug users the resources that they need. And at the same time, the decriminalized nature folks are moving policy at the state level to decriminalize psychedelics. So it's interesting, it's like separate spaces, separate movements, but they're happening parallelly. They need to be in more dialogue. I'll pause there and turn it over to someone else.
I love this question. This is great. I'll speak from my experience. I don't know how, okay, whatever, we'll just speak. I don't know how psychedelic therapists do the work without also doing harm reduction directly with the community at the same time. It like blows my mind. Like if like straight up serving those who are the most underserved, like chaotic relationships with their drugs in San Francisco in a lonely land, like, and I don't, what it humbles, what I bring from that work into a ketamine space is completely, so I would say that's my answer, is that like get into relationship with somebody who uses drugs, get like the drugs that you don't use, and like know them. Maybe there's somebody that you like are otherwise trying to kind of disappear from your experience because it's uncomfortable, but get in relationship. Additionally, I love, Paula, that you mentioned spiritual bypassing. If you are benefiting from psychedelic medicines, go to therapy. Like seriously, just that's it. Like you like and I will help you personally find somebody who works best for you, but there's so much in regards to spiritual bypassing that can happen, that like we really got to find a way to look in the mirror and do that work. Or maybe you're doing your art or you're doing some other way that is therapeutic for you, but like really being attentive to how am I bypassing in this place? Like how am I then rewriting the experience for everybody else who utilizes benefit from these medicines? There's so much I would say about that, relationships and therapy.
Thank you. This has been just incredible. What a joy, what a gift to be able to be in this space with you. I just feel so grateful. And like, yeah, we're going to keep connecting. Like this isn't over. You can't get rid of me that quickly. But we're going to go ahead and hear Danny's call to action and take a little bit of a break. So we're going to wrap up this session, take a break before we get into our closing ceremonies for the conference. So thank you. Muchísimas gracias a todas. Mwah.